Hey, this video is about the weight things carried motif. And we're looking at 3.2, step 3, literary aspect jigsaw. You're taking notes about the literary aspect that you chose. And this one is weight things carried motif. Poor little kitty, stuck under a heavy weight. All right, what are we talking about when we use this label, weight, things carried, motif? Well, a motif is an object or idea that repeats itself throughout a literary work and includes some kind of symbolic significance, right? And when we're talking about the weight and things carried specifically, we're talking about both literal and figurative weight, right? Burdens we talk about a lot in regular speech, right? That we have a certain burden that we have to carry. It's not always literal, right? And so we have both the literal and the figurative here. So anytime you see in the book references to somebody being weighed down with something, carrying something, being burdened, and even feeling pressure, these all would work as examples of the weight things carried motif. Sometimes also the carrying is a little bit different. It's not totally negative. Sometimes it's carrying a memento, something to remember someone by, or a protective item, or something to help the person in some way. So it's not just being burdened, but also sometimes carrying something that is positive. Okay, then there's also the opposite of the burden pressure piece. Watch where you see O'Brien reference being relieved of weight or burdens or pressure. Anytime he or another character, O'Brien, the narrator, or another character is all of a sudden not weighed down at all. Or similarly, when the weight is too much, so much that the person feels crushed, or something feels cracked and cracking, and the person feels succumbing, like they're succumbing to the pressure. All right, so these are all some different things to look for as you are reading. What are some examples from the first 58 pages? Well, first of all, we've got the title of the book, right? Whenever a motif is in the title of a book, you know it's significant, right? And you can talk about it as such. It's also the title of the first chapter. Notice that I've got this italicized because it's a large work. This is in quotation marks because it's within a larger work, a smaller work within a larger work. And here is our very first sentence of the book. First Lieutenant Jimmy Cross carried letters from a girl named Martha. So the very first sentence of the book includes a reference to this motif. Page 7, and then in that first chapter we have so many references, right? So I included a few here, but I mean there are multiple examples on every page, I think, of that first chapter. They carried whatever presented itself or whatever seemed appropriate as a means of killing or staying alive. They carried all the emotional baggage of men who might die. So here's the figurative aspect, right? Things they carried, title of the book. Whoops, we already talked about that. First Lieutenant Jimmy Cross. Oh, I got some repetitions here. My bad. The letters weighed 4 ounces is another one from page 2. And so you'll notice that sometimes the listing of the objects includes how much it weighs, especially in that first chapter, but elsewhere in the book as well. And so, like, here's a good example on page 2 of that. They all carried steel helmets that weighed 5 pounds. They carried the standard fatigue jackets and trousers on their feet. They carried jungle boots, 2.1 pounds. And in this chapter, the narrator is, listing item after item after item that the GIs are carrying, and even telling us explicitly how much these things weighed. Even something as, light as a letter that only weighs 4 ounces. We already did that one. They shared the weight of memory. They carried their own lives on page 15. On 16, he had loved Martha more than his men, and as a consequence, Lavender was now dead, and this was something he would have to carry. like a stone in his stomach for the rest of the war. They carried all the emotional baggage. We got that one already. It was very sad, he thought. The things men carried inside, the things men did or felt they had to do. And that one is Lieutenant Jimmy Cross towards the end of the Things They Carried chapter. I'm hoping to relieve at least some of the pressure on my dreams. Tim O'Brien, the narrator, says this on page 37. This is On the Rainy River in that chapter. And he's talking about telling the story as a way of relieving pressure. The terrible squeezing pressure of the feeling on the boat of a great worldwide sadness that came pressing down on me, a crushing sorrow like I had never known it before, at the end of the chapter On the Rainy River. All right, well, what are some effects of this literary aspect? It creates a parallel feeling in the reader to the feelings of the characters. The listing of objects, one after the other, and their corresponding weight, makes the reader feel similarly burdened, heavy, oppressed, weighed down. At the same time, it gives us that feeling, that longing to shed, release, and relieve the pressure before being crushed, before succumbing completely to the pressure, just like the GIs would have felt. The feeling of wanting to carry a memento for safety or memory reminds us how alone and unprotected the soldiers are, and maybe how random the deaths are, really how little they know of what is going to happen next, and how little they can control what is going to happen next. And then the telling of the story and how it creates a relief for the narrator characters, creates a relief for us as the reader as well. How does it connect to themes? First of all, The Power of Voice to Create Truths is a story created to escape some of the pressure. And how does it, if so, how is it changing the truth? And I think we do see this later in the book, where O'Brien as narrator or O'Brien as writer changes the truth in order to deal with the pressure, with the burdens, and to relieve it. The burden of war stories, this word is right in here in this theme. So think about, what is the impact of war on the psyche, memory, and beliefs of the soldiers in Vietnam? How does O'Brien carry the burden? How does he release it, or does he release it at all? Innocence, guilt, and redemption. How does guilt weigh on the narrator and other characters? How do characters find redemption or a way of dealing with that guilt? What happens when they don't? And then finally, for story and imagination as creative forces, think about this question. How does storytelling relieve the pressure, protect the story, or protect the storyteller, and create a memory that somehow restores the storyteller or gives hope to them? All right, I hope this is helpful for you as you look for more examples of this literary aspect as you read.